You're watching Beyond Market, where we bring you up to speed on development outcomes on the continent here in Africa. I'm Kenneth Igbomor, and welcome to the show. On Beyond Markets today, as the COVID-19 pandemic takes the demand levels for vital medical supplies to unprecedented levels, we'll find out what organizations are doing to help bridge this gap. You can join the conversation on social media and let us know what you think. The hashtag to use is Beyond Market, and send me a message on Twitter on my handle at Kenneth Igbomor. Now, UK social finance company MedAccess is providing a guarantee of $15 million to enable UNICEF secure essential medical products from suppliers to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. CEO of MedAccess, Michael Anderson, says the surging demand for COVID-19 healthcare supplies has led to supply shortages and sharp price rises. He joins me now to shed some more light on this partnership and what they hope to achieve. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, sir. And let's first start with the pressures we're seeing the COVID-19 pandemic exert on the healthcare systems across the world and Africa specifically.
Thank you, Kenneth. We are seeing unprecedented demand on healthcare systems, and at a time when getting supplies into the right places at the right time is a critical challenge. And it's partly that people need supplies very urgently. They need protective equipment, they need infection control equipment, they need oxygen, they need treatments. But it's also the case that the science is changing. And so the regimes for treatment are moving rapidly. So we need a global system that can respond to both very effectively. And it is a time, the biggest challenge of all is that demand exceeds supply. And so sometimes we're seeing supplies going to the highest bidder rather than to those who really need it.
All right, now let's get into this partnership that you have with UNICEF, and let's know what you're planning to achieve from that.
Yeah, so MedAccess is a company. We are a company like any other, except that so we employ bankers and market analysts, and we do very, very careful, rigorous business projections. But unlike most companies, we're not designed to make a profit. Our goal is to improve health in the world. And so we are supported by the British government. We work as a company, and we've decided to partner with UNICEF. And what we have provided with them is a $50 million guarantee that allows them to make purchases of key equipment, key treatments in advance of knowing exactly for sure where those treatments will be needed. So that means that they're able to get allocations of some of the most important medical equipment in advance, in timely manner, and they can distribute it to the countries that need it most. So at the moment, UNICEF is distributing to 116 countries around the world, and they are actively looking at what is the demand and trying to match demand with supply in a timely way at prices that are assured, that aren't volatile. And that helps us get around some of the challenges that we've seen in the last few months. We've seen people stockpiling and hoarding supplies. We've seen supplies going to the highest bidder. We've seen profiteering. We've seen supplies that are misallocated. And so this introduces some rationality into the system. It's designed to work closely with the Africa CDC initiatives so that there's close collaboration in both.
All right, just because I was going to ask how you're getting other organizations already playing in that space already, because I've spoken to the Africa CDC DG, and he's talked to me about some of the initiatives they're taking, especially around getting countries to pool resources together so they can get more equipment from suppliers. I'd like you to get your thoughts on this.
Well, this is absolutely vital. Doing pooled procurement, countries collaborating together to get the equipment they need, means that they can buy larger amounts at lower prices, and that is a key intervention that MedAccess supports, and that's a big part of our finance. And then also it works for companies because that means it de-risks the proposition of bringing large orders to markets that otherwise the demand is uncertain. And so what we provide is we provide the guarantees to assure that the payments will be made. So what Africa CDC is doing is absolutely vital. They've got the initiative going forward on running out vaccines across Africa, which are really appropriate to make sure that we have a framework of 12 clinical trials taking place across the continent. They're working on licensing models to make sure that the right kinds of vaccines get in place. So that's all for the future as the vaccines get tested and moved out. But for the immediate time, what Africa CDC is doing is helping to lead the work with Afreximbank to do large-scale procurement of critical equipment, including infection control, oxygen, treatments, and so on. Now that collaboration, which is Africa specific, works closely with the UNICEF collaboration, which is global in scope. And there's been good mechanisms for the two to work together. And that means that working together, we can help to place the right kinds of orders of the right size with the producers, who often have to place their orders several months in advance to get the intermediate equipment so that they can do the manufacturing. So what we're seeing, COVID has really introduced a new paradigm of global collaboration on supply of emergency equipment. And that is a really important breakthrough. We've seen some really important breakthroughs, especially in the African continent, with the AU and the Africa CDC moving forward together.
But how can we see initiatives like this being sustained over time and building that resilience that we've all been looking for the continent?
Well, that's absolutely critical because, of course, the future of sustainable healthcare is going to depend upon health systems being strengthened, very strong primary care, and long-term sustainable finance. Where's that sustainable finance going to come from? Well, for the low-income countries, it's going to have to continue to come to some extent from donors, from the World Bank, from the bilateral donors, from the Global Fund in the fight against AIDS, TB, malaria, from Gavi, the Vaccines Alliance. Those are the big donors who will help channel money to the lowest income countries. For more middle income countries, we're going to have to see increased efforts at using domestic fiscal measures, including taxation, to help support that long-term primary care, the health system strengthening, the recruitment of the staff, the personnel, the systems. And only that can create the ability and the resilience for health systems to respond to pandemics like COVID. Of course, we've got this one for the next few years we have to deal with, and we don't know exactly where it's going to land. But there are a lot of lessons to be learned here, including the importance of building the long-term institutions with sustainable financing. I expect, Kenneth, we're going to see the world's governments shifting a lot of their priorities towards health, because there's a deep recognition of how important health is, not only to people and their immediate lives and diseases and their well-being, but also, as we've seen with COVID, to economic growth, to livelihoods, to economic sustainability, but also social integration and building all of the things in societies that we want to achieve. And unless we have health systems secured, all of those things are under threat, as we've seen in the last few months.
All right, Michael, but for African countries, though, looking at the fact that we're expecting a surge in the number of COVID-19 cases, how can these countries better, take advantage of initiatives like what you're putting out with UNICEF, to mitigate the impact on their countries?
Well, I think that we now have an opportunity to use smart finance, and that's one of the things that we're trying to push forward is use finance in an innovative way to think about helping to de-risk, to anticipate, to make the most of the money that is available, to ensure that we get the most medical care per unit of expenditure that we have. So there's innovative finance has a really big role to play. We need to see more in the way of sustained pooled procurement. We need to see more in the way of regulatory harmonization. At the moment, for example, if one wants to register a diagnostic test for use in a country, most countries run their own individual regulatory approvals on each test. And there's clearly room to harmonize those processes so that once we find a good test that works, we can introduce a system, potentially across Africa, where all of Africa has the same harmonization of regulatory standards as we see, for example, in Europe. So Europe has a harmonized regulatory system. Once a product, a drug, or a test has been approved at the all Europe level, then it's approved for use across all of the countries. And of course, the World Health Organization plays an important role there. The World Health Organization already does a lot of validation of regulation and so on. So that's an important way forward, is to look for that harmonization of regulation. But the pooled procurement, finding ways of building off this COVID experience so that there can be ways of procuring large amounts of goods at lower prices and consistent prices. And the last thing I'd point to, Kenneth, is that we are seeing more and more increase in health problems associated not just with the communicable diseases, the malaria, the TB, the HIV, which we've known about for years, in which there's coordinated action, as with this pandemic. But we're also seeing growing health burden in things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer. And in those areas, we haven't seen any pooled procurement really at all. We've seen very little in the way of systematic cross-country collaboration and tackling those challenges. We've seen some, of course, but there's a lot of room to improve the delivery there. And I think the initiatives we've seen from Africa CDC and the Global Fund and Gavi and others really pave the way towards a new generation where we can use new instruments to think ahead about what health needs are going to be and to act in concert. So that means the future is going to have to be about countries working together more closely, collaborating more closely, and finding solutions together.
Yeah, interestingly when you put it that way, but I would like to find out how the guarantee is going to work and play out, and as well as, why you chose this approach from the multitude of other options that you had.
The guarantee works because what UNICEF, as many agencies, UNICEF is built so that it can procure goods once there is certainty that the funding is in place. But we know it takes a long time for the funding to come together. So different countries have their allocations at different times. They often, health ministries find themselves deciding they want to allocate something, but they've not placed the advance orders that are necessary to get the goods they need quickly. The countries operate in different timescales, and because of that, what we have is a cacophony of different orders at different times for different goods, and that's not a recipe for success in a world market where there are a relatively small number of manufacturers who are producing limited amounts of supplies that are in great demand. So the way UNICEF works is UNICEF is able to place advanced procurement orders of larger amounts at lower prices, and our guarantee allows UNICEF to have the certainty to know that they will be able to have their costs covered. And so we fully expect that the funding will come together so that these items can be paid for and distributed and delivered properly at the right time. But until that certainty is there, our guarantee allows UNICEF and other organizations to move ahead with advanced purchases and purchases in bulk and at lower prices. And that saves everyone money, but critically, it means that when a country does decide, okay, we need so many thousand tons of this product, then that can be available because UNICEF's already placed the orders, or already is in the supply chain. And UNICEF is able to rely upon its strong network of country offices so that it can get local coordination with ministries in place, and that's critical. Now we're seeing the same kind of initiative with Africa CDC, and which is operating at a Pan-Africa level, and I think the Africa CDC initiative has been really good at coordinating understanding of local needs and feeding that up, which was an important initiative. So I think guarantee of the kind that we provide is a quick solution that allows procurement to take place immediately while the various agencies get together and decide what sort of funding they're going to allocate, and the ministries decide what sort of funding they're going to allocate.
All right, then I need you to hold that thought for a second, but we'll take a quick break. Definitely more to unpack when we come back after the break. I've been speaking to Michael Anderson. He's the CEO of MedAccess. Beyond Market continues after the break. Welcome back to Beyond the Market. If you're just joining me, my guest today is Michael Anderson, as the CEO of MedAccess, and we've been exploring how they've been working to bridge the gap for the shortage of essential COVID-19 supplies. Michael, before we went on the break, I'd also like to get your thoughts on the type of impact that you are trying to achieve with this initiative.
Well, the key goal is to find a way to manage this pandemic. And we know that the very first thing that is needed is infection control, the equipment that is needed for healthcare workers to stay safe and uninfected and able to continue to work with patients. So that impact is simply empowering the healthcare workers to be protected, and beyond that, key workers to make sure that they're protected from infection as far as possible. The next critical component is helping to support diagnostic testing, and we've had a lot of information about diagnostic testing and how critical it is. We know it's been in short supply in many parts of the world. Most countries in Africa don't have enough testing to meet the plans of their health ministries to deal with the pandemic. So we're seeing some real changes there. Part of the impact we want to have is we want to accelerate access to as many tests as possible. And the work that we're doing with UNICEF is doing precisely that, so that UNICEF can procure large amounts of testing kits and get them distributed as rapidly as possible. But we're also paying close attention to the changing science. There are dozens of new companies that are bringing new tests to market, and we need to pay attention to which of those tests are going to be most appropriate for the needs set out by health ministries. The tests come in three basic kinds at the moment. The most important one is the nucleic acid testing that does a quick diagnosis, but we're looking at portable tests, rapid diagnostic tests, and tests will be able to test afterwards to see if you've been infected in the past. So antigen tests and antibody tests, these are all evolving quickly. We want to provide a financial framework that will respond to the latest science and help countries get the best possible equipment that is available as the science and the technology changes.
All right, Michael, quite a good one you mentioned that, because I would like you to speak to the need for new thinking that is required to achieve health outcomes, especially when you look at the area of innovative funding models.
Yeah, so I think we're going to have to see ways in which governments are able to commit large sums of money for new equipment in conditions like this, where we see an emergency hit the continent, hits the whole world, and we've seen treasuries and finance ministries really pull out all the stops to find ways to create fiscal space to support this. We think that guarantees of the kind that we provide can really play a critical role, but there's also potentially a role for insurance. Many countries are currently using drought insurance to plan over a period of years for that key event. When the drought hits, then there can be some increasing resource made available in that critical year. I think there's a case to consider those kinds of models for healthcare, but we're also seeing the WHO has set up the COVID Access to Tools Accelerator, which is an initiative that's happening globally to pull together funding from the bilateral donors, from business, from governments together to find ways to invest in the new products and to make sure that once those products are funded and tested and available, that they're distributed according to need. So one of the big changes we really need to see is a more rational allocation system, so that the goods are delivered to countries in need rather than those countries that happen to have the best diplomatic ties or the financial clout or a robust leadership that's pushing very hard to get as much of the equipment as they need. Of course, leaders absolutely are right to want to protect their citizens. And at the same time, we need to introduce some rationality across the system so that there's a needs-based allocation driven by the best possible evidence. So a combination of advanced funding, new pooling of funding from around the world, and the kinds of instruments like we are using with guarantees, but also volume commitments, price ceiling agreements. These are the kinds of things that can help bring new products to market faster and at affordable prices. One critical thing that we do is we provide companies with volume guarantees, and that means that it gives companies the certainty that they will make a certain amount of sales over a period of years. And because they have the certainty that they know that they can sell over a period of years due to our guarantee, they're able to bring down their prices. They're able to increase their production levels, which brings about cost savings in the unit price. And it also introduces sustainability and predictability in the supplies. And once you have predictable supply chains, that is absolutely key, because if the clinicians and the purchasers know that those products are going to be there at a ceiling price for a period of years, that gives them the confidence to go out and start prescribing the drugs that they can now rely upon at a price they know is affordable, and knowing that the supplies are available. So we think there's a critical role for de-risking many of the transactions that happen in the supply chains, and guarantees are a really important part of that. So we're looking forward to doing many more of these guarantees in the future. And as I said, our key target is to ensure that we're improving healthcare around the world, but especially in low and middle income countries, by helping to drive down prices, improve affordability, improve access, and at the same time make sure that companies have some of the most serious risks that they face in uncertain markets, that those risks are also reduced. So potentially it's a win-win, where patients get products reliably at an affordable price, and earlier than they would otherwise get them, and companies know that they are in a situation where they can be commercially sustainable. Those are the kinds of initiatives I think we need to see in the next 10 years. And now is the time to learn from the COVID epidemic, so that we can take the lessons and rebuild new systems better.
All right, Michael, I'd like to know the wiggle room you have for expanding this intervention beyond the 50 million mark. Like you mentioned, you said you're looking to do others as well. But I'd like to know the wiggle room that you have, and then if the need arises, by how much you can expand this. Also, talk about the importance of leaving no one behind as we look for financing solutions to deal with this pandemic.
So we are actively engaged in negotiations both with companies to see if we can support them in bringing new products to market faster and at lower prices. So quite a lot of negotiation there, but of the kind of support that we're able to give to UNICEF to help them with their procurement system is also support that we're able to provide for others. I'm not going to put a precise dollar figure on it, but that we certainly have room to do a number of more guarantees. The exact size of that will depend on the risk profile and the duration, but we would be looking to certainly make this similar kind of commitment in size, again, to a number of possible partners. But it all depends on what the products are and what the needs are. In terms of leave no one behind, this is a really important component. In the Sustainable Development Goals, the leave no one behind principle is probably the single strongest principle. That means we need to pay attention to making sure that there's finance available in rural areas as well as cities, making sure that there's health system delivery in the poorest countries as well as in the middle income countries, and ensuring that we are reaching all parts of all communities, regardless of ethnicity, geographical location, and so on. That's a big, big challenge. The only way that can really be achieved is by having strong health systems in which the government plays an important role. Now, there's clearly role for insurance systems, and we've seen some important national insurance systems being launched and being effective. But even where there are insurance systems, we think that the only way to reach those parts that are most difficult to reach is to involve the government. So we look forward to helping to support access to better supplies the most we can do is to make sure those supplies get into country. And then it's the job of the ministries supported by international agencies and private sector to make sure that the delivery happens. We see our role as ensuring that the key equipment and the key medicines are affordable and accessible and available on a reliable basis. And that, we think, is really important to make sure that no one is left behind.
All right, Michael. Interesting you mentioned the SDG there, and definitely quite a lot to talk about because it's just a decade away till the targets, and the importance of not losing the progress that have been made over the years is very important, especially in focus to fight against other diseases. I'd like you to speak to this point.
Well, so the overall the SDG agenda created room to consider healthcare more broadly. Not just the targeted diseases. What we had under the Millennium Development Goals was a focus on some particular diseases and maternal and infant health. We are now looking to a world where governments are talking more and more about universal healthcare, which ensures a level of healthcare provision for everyone in society. And that's going to require new forms of finance. So I think that one of the things we're going to need to see is governments thinking in an innovative way about what are the various forms of finance, how do they combine the private sector provision with government direct provision and government contracted provision. How do we see bringing in local manufacturing? So there's a lot of room in Africa to have stronger local manufacturing, which will bring the manufacturers closer to the users. Absolutely critical in that drive that we ensure that the prices of the products do not escalate too much, because with many of the pharmaceutical goods, the lowest priced goods come from China and from India, and there's real scope to move the production of those goods to African countries. But when that move happens, we need to make sure that the big price advantages that have been achieved with production from India and China are not lost. So there's a manufacturing change. There is a scope for expanding pharmaceutical industry and healthcare industry across Africa, scope for improving the government interventions for universal healthcare, and the scope for ensuring that all of this is made more effective and more rapid through global collaboration of the kind that we've seen with Africa CDC, and the kind we've seen with UNICEF, the kind we've seen with entities such as the Global Fund. So it really is a picture of all of these various parts coming together and playing their own role in an orchestra that produces a full response for healthcare needs. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of those growing needs are going to be the needs associated with the non-communicable diseases, the diabetes, the cancer, the cardiovascular disease, but also the challenges of aging, which will continue to be a growing challenge.
All right then. All right then, Michael. Definitely quite a lot to look at there in the future, and a lot to look at and plan as well. So we plan ahead to tackle this pandemic. I've been speaking to Michael Anderson, the CEO of MedAccess. I'm afraid that's all we have time for on Beyond Markets for today, and that's it on the show. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can catch the show at 5 p.m. West Africa time daily, and have access to all episodes of Beyond Markets on our website. That's at cnbcafrica.com. From me and the team, enjoy the rest of your day.